12-year-old Jake Carter hurried down the street, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. It was a chilly afternoon, and he could see his breath in the air. School had just ended, and he was excited to get his favorite sandwich from the shop near his house. As he stepped inside the small deli, the smell of fresh bread and grilled meat filled his nose. He smiled and walked up to the counter. "One turkey and cheese sandwich, please," he said, handing over the money his mom had given him. The cashier, a friendly older woman, nodded. "Coming right up, Jake." Jake waited patiently as she prepared his sandwich. He loved this place. The food was always fresh, and the people were nice. When his order was ready, he took the warm sandwich, wrapped neatly in paper, and placed it in his backpack. As he walked out, he noticed an old man sitting on the sidewalk near the shop. The man had a thick gray beard and wore a torn jacket. His hands were red from the cold, and his eyes looked tired. He held a small cardboard sign with shaky writing. "Hungry. Please help." Jake slowed down. He had seen homeless people before, but he never really stopped to think about them. His mom sometimes gave spare change to people on the street, but he had never done it himself. He looked down at his sandwich. He was hungry too, but he knew he would have dinner at home in a couple of hours. This man, on the other hand, might not have eaten all day. Taking a deep breath, Jake walked up to the man. "Hi, sir," he said, feeling a little nervous. The man looked up, surprised. "Hello, son," he replied in a soft, scratchy voice. Jake hesitated for a moment, then pulled out his sandwich and handed it over. "Here, you can have this." The man's eyes widened in shock. "For me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Jake nodded. "Yeah, it's fresh. I hope you like turkey and cheese." The man smiled, showing missing teeth. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. God bless you, son." His hand shook as he took the sandwich, holding it carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Jake felt a warmth in his chest. He didn't know why, but seeing the man's happiness made him feel really good. "No problem," he said with a small smile. "What's your name, boy?" the man asked, unwrapping the sandwich carefully. "Jake," he answered. "Jake, you're a good kid," the man said, taking the small bite. He chewed slowly, as if savoring every flavor. Jake watched for a moment, then waved goodbye. "Take care, sir." "You too, Jake," the man said, his voice filled with gratitude. Jake walked home feeling lighter, happier. It was such a small thing, just a sandwich, but it had made a difference to someone. He couldn't wait to tell his mom about it. Little did he know, that simple act of kindness would change his life forever. The next morning, Jake sat at the kitchen table, eating a bowl of cereal. The sweet crunch filled his mouth as he swung his legs under the chair. His mom stood by the sink, pouring herself a cup of coffee. It was a quiet, normal morning, until they heard a loud knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Jake froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. His mom looked at the door, frowning. "Who could that be this early?" she muttered. She set her coffee down and walked over to the door. When she opened it, Jake saw two police officers standing outside. Their dark blue uniforms and serious expressions made his stomach twist. "Good morning, Mom," one of the officers said. He had short brown hair and held a small notepad in his hand. "Is this the Carter residence?" Jake's mom nodded slowly. "Yes. Is something wrong?" The second officer, an older man with a mustache, glanced inside the house. His eyes landed on Jake. "Is that your son?" Jake's heart started beating faster. Why were the police asking about him? Had he done something wrong? His mom's face tightened. "Yes, that's Jake. What's going on?" The first officer smiled slightly, trying to look friendly. "We just have a few questions for him. May we come in?" Jake's mom hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." The officers walked in, their heavy boots clicking against the wooden floor. Jake swallowed hard as they approached the kitchen table. "Morning, Jake," the officer with the notepad said. We just need to ask you about something that happened yesterday. Do you remember giving a sandwich to a homeless man near the sandwich shop? Jake blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected this at all. Slowly, he nodded. Yeah, I did. Is he okay?" The officers exchanged a glance. The older one cleared his throat. "We're trying to find out more about him. Can you describe him for us?" Jake frowned, thinking. Well, he was old with a gray beard. He had a torn jacket, and his hands looked really cold. Oh, and he had a sign that said he was hungry. The officer wrote something down in his notepad. "Did he tell you his name?" Jake shook his head. "No, but he was really nice. He said thank you and called me a good kid." The officers nodded, then asked a few more questions. What time it happened, how long Jake talked to him, and if the man said anything strange. Jake answered as best as he could, but he was growing more nervous by the second. Finally, his mom stepped in. "Excuse me, but can you please tell us why you're asking all these questions? My son didn't do anything wrong, did he?" The older officer looked at her and gave a small, reassuring smile. "No, ma'am. Your son didn't do anything wrong at all. In fact, he may have helped someone very important." Jake and his mom exchanged confused looks. "Helped someone? What do you mean?" his mom asked. The officer sighed. "The man Jake helped wasn't just any homeless person. He's been missing for months. His family has been searching for him everywhere." Jake's eyes widened. "Missing? Like, lost?" The officer nodded. "Yes, and thanks to the sandwich Jake gave him, we might be able to bring him home." Jake's heart pounded. He had only wanted to help a hungry man, but now it seemed like his small act of kindness had led to something much bigger. Jake sat frozen in his chair, his spoon still resting in his cereal bowl. His mind raced as he tried to understand what the police officer had just said. The old man was missing. His family had been looking for him. His mom was the first to speak. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice careful. "Are you saying my son found a missing person?" The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We believe so. The man your son helped yesterday matches the description of Harold Sinclair. His family reported him missing a few months ago. He suffers from memory loss and confusion. They'd been searching for him for a long time." Jake's eyes widened. I didn't know that. I just thought he was homeless." The officer gave him a kind smile. "That's understandable, Jake. You did a good thing by helping him." Then his expression turned serious again. "But we need to find him. Can you remember anything else? Did he say where he was going?" Jake shook his head. "No. He just thanked me and started eating the sandwich." He frowned, trying to recall any small details. "Oh, he asked for my name. But that's all." The officers exchanged a look. The older one jotted something down in his notepad. "That means he remembered your kindness, which could help us locate him." Jake's mom rubbed her arms. "Why hasn't anyone found him yet? If his family was looking for him, shouldn't they have found him already?" The officer sighed. "It's not that simple. Some missing people don't even realize they're lost. If Mr. Sinclair is confused, he might be avoiding people without knowing why. He could be scared or unsure of who to trust." Jake bit his lip. "So, what happens now?" The officer straightened. "We need to find him as soon as possible. He might still be in the area. Jake, if you see him again, don't approach him. Just call us immediately. It's important that we get him back to his family safely." Jake nodded. "Okay, I promise." The officers thanked them and left. As soon as the door shut, Jake turned to his mom. "I can't believe this. I just gave a guy a sandwich, and now the police are looking for him." His mom smiled softly and ruffled his hair. "It just shows that even small acts of kindness can have a big impact." But even as she said the words, Jake could see the worry in her eyes. She was thinking the same thing he was. Where was the old man now? That afternoon, Jake walked home from school feeling different. Usually, he listened to music or played games on his phone, but today, His eyes scanned the streets. He found himself looking into alleyways, under shop awnings, and at bus stops, wondering if he would see the old man again. He passed the sandwich shop and slowed down. The spot where the man had been sitting was empty. Jake sighed. What if he had left town? What if no one ever found him? Just as he was about to keep walking, something caught his eye. A crumpled napkin lay near the curb, and on it was the sandwich shop's logo, the same kind of napkin that had been wrapped around the sandwich he gave the man. Jake's heart pounded. Had the old man been here again? He bent down and picked up the napkin. It wasn't much, but it was a clue. If Mr. Sinclair had come back to this area, maybe he was still nearby. Jake knew what he had to do. He needed to keep his eyes open. If he saw the man again, he would make sure the police could help him get home. Little did he know, he was about to be pulled even deeper into the mystery. Jake held the crumpled napkin in his hands, his heart pounding. It might not seem like much, but to him, it was a clue. The old man had been here again. He looked around, hoping to see him, but the street was mostly empty. A couple of people walked past, busy with their own lives. No one seemed to notice Jake standing there, deep in thought. Finally, he stuffed the napkin into his pocket and kept walking home. He had promised the police he wouldn't go looking for the old man himself, but part of him wished he could do more. That evening, as Jake sat at the dinner table with his mom, the doorbell rang. His mom wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and went to answer it. Jake listened carefully. Was it the police again? Had they found the old man? A moment later, his mom stepped aside, and Jake's eyes widened in shock. Standing in the doorway was the old man. His beard was a little messier, and his jacket still looked worn, but his eyes were filled with something new. Recognition. He wasn't just lost and confused anymore. He had come here on purpose. Jake stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. You're here. The old man gave a small smile. Hello, Jake. The sound of his name made Jake's stomach flip. The man remembered him. Jake's mom looked concerned. Sir, are you okay? Do you need help? The man nodded slowly. I think I do. Before anyone could say anything else, the flashing lights of a police car lit up the street. The officers had arrived. The next few minutes passed in a blur. The same officers from that morning stepped out of the car, looking relieved. Mr. Sinclair, one of them called. Are you all right? The old man, Harold Sinclair, nodded. I think so, he said, though he still looked a little unsure. I don't remember everything, but I remember Jake. He was kind to me. Jake's chest swelled with warmth. He had no idea his simple act had made such a difference. One of the officers turned to Jake with a smile. Jake, your kindness helped bring Mr. Sinclair home. Jake felt his mom squeeze his shoulder proudly. I'm just glad he's safe, he said. The officer nodded, then turned to Mr. Sinclair. Your family has been looking for you, sir. They'll be so happy to see you. Mr. Sinclair's face softened. My family, he murmured, as if the words felt distant. Then, after a pause, his eyes brightened. Yes, my daughter, Emily. The officers exchanged a hopeful glance. That's right. She's been searching for you for months. For the first time, tears welled up in Mr. Sinclair's eyes. I want to go home. Jake watched as the officers gently helped him toward the car. Just before getting in, Mr. Sinclair turned back to Jake. You gave me more than a sandwich, he said. You gave me kindness when I had nothing. Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm really glad you're going home, Mr. Sinclair. The old man smiled. Thank you, Jake. And with that, the officers drove away, taking him back to his family. Jake stood on the porch with his mom, watching the taillights disappear down the street. He let out a deep breath, feeling something between relief and amazement. His mom ruffled his hair. You did something really special today, she said. Jake smiled. I just gave a guy a sandwich. His mom shook her head. No, Jake. You gave a man hope. Jake looked up at the stars, feeling like maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger. The next few days passed like a dream. Jake kept thinking about what had happened, how one small sandwich had helped a lost man find his way home. It still didn't seem real. At school, his best friend, Lucas, couldn't believe it. "Dude, you're like a hero," he said excitedly as they walked to class. Jake shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just gave him food." Lucas smirked. "Yeah, but because of you, the cops found him. What if he had stayed lost forever? What if?" Their teacher, Mrs. Parker, cleared her throat. "Boys, inside voices, please." Lucas grinned, but he whispered, "You should be in the news for this." Jake laughed. "Yeah, right." But Lucas wasn't the only one who thought it was a big deal. When Jake got home that afternoon, his mom was sitting at the kitchen table with a strange look on her face. "Jake," she said, "there's someone here to see you." Jake frowned. "Who?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped aside, revealing a woman sitting on the couch. She had short brown hair and kind eyes. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she looked nervous but hopeful. "Hello, Jake," she said softly. Jake blinked. Hi." His mom spoke gently. "This is Emily Sinclair, Mr. Sinclair's daughter." Jake's eyes widened. "The old man's daughter." Emily smiled. "I wanted to meet you. My father told me what you did for him." Jake shifted on his feet. "I didn't really do much," he said shyly. Emily shook her head. "You did more than you know. My dad had been missing for months. We searched everywhere, put up posters, talked to shelters, but we couldn't find him." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "We were starting to lose hope." Jake didn't know what to say. He had never thought about it from the family's perspective before. He had only seen a hungry man on the street, but to them, that man was everything. Emily wiped her eyes and smiled. "Then he met you. He told me you were kind to him, that you made him feel like a person again. That kindness helped him remember me. It led him back to us." Jake swallowed hard. "I'm really happy he's home." Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a small package. "I wanted to give you this," she said, handing it to him. Jake took the package and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a brand new sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. "I heard from the officers that you like to draw," Emily said. "My dad used to be an artist. He wanted you to have this as a thank you." Jake ran his fingers over the smooth cover of the sketchbook. He loved to draw, but he had never owned such nice supplies before. "Wow, thank you." Emily smiled. "No, Jake, thank you." She stood up and shook his hand. "If you ever want to visit, you're always welcome at our home. My dad would love to see you again." Jake felt a warm feeling spread through his chest. He had never expected anything in return, but knowing he had helped someone, that was the best reward of all. As Emily left, Jake sat down and opened the sketchbook. The first page was blank, waiting for something new. Smiling to himself, he picked up a pencil and started to draw. Jake sat at his desk, staring at the blank page in his new sketchbook. He ran his fingers over the smooth paper, thinking about what to draw. He wanted it to be special, something that meant something. After a few moments, he picked up a pencil and started sketching. His hand moved carefully, outlining the figure of an old man sitting on a sidewalk. He drew the wrinkles on his face, the sadness in his eyes, and the torn jacket he had worn that day. Then he added a small detail, a sandwich in his hands. As he worked, he remembered every moment of that day. How cold it had been, how hungry Mr. Sinclair had looked, how his simple act of kindness had led to something much bigger. After an hour, the drawing was finished. Jake sat back and looked at it, feeling proud. He had captured the moment perfectly. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a memory. Just then, his mom peeked into his room. "Hey, Jake, what are you up to?" Jake held up the sketchbook. "I drew Mr. Sinclair. His mom walked over and looked at the picture. Her eyes softened. "That's amazing, Jake. It really looks like him." Jake smiled. "I think I want to give it to him." His mom raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," Jake said. "He was an artist, right? Maybe he'll like it." His mom nodded. "That's a great idea. I'll call Emily and see if we can visit them this weekend." Jake felt a small wave of excitement. He had never visited someone he barely knew before, but something about this felt right. That Saturday, Jake and his mom drove to Emily's house. It was a small, cozy home with a white picket fence. As they pulled into the driveway, Jake felt nervous. Would Mr. Sinclair remember him? Would he like the drawing? Emily greeted them at the door with a big smile. "Jake, I'm so glad you came." Jake smiled back. "Thanks for inviting us." She led them inside, where Mr. Sinclair was sitting in a comfortable chair by the window. He looked different, cleaner, healthier, and more awake. His eyes no longer looked lost. Instead, they were full of warmth. When he saw Jake, his face lit up. "Jake, my boy." Jake grinned. "Hi, Mr. Sinclair." The old man reached out and took Jake's hand. "I've been hoping to see you again. How are you?" "I'm good," Jake said. "And I actually brought something for you." He pulled out his sketchbook and carefully tore out the drawing. "I made this for you." Mr. Sinclair took the paper and studied it closely. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then his lips trembled and tears filled his eyes. This is beautiful," he whispered. "You captured everything. The cold, the hunger, but also the kindness." Jake felt his own eyes sting. "I just wanted to remember that day, and to say thank you for showing me that even small things matter." Mr. Sinclair wiped his eyes and smiled. "No, Jake, I should be thanking you. You reminded me that people still care. You gave me more than food. You gave me a reason to find my way home." Jake's heart swelled with pride. He had never felt this way before, like he had truly changed someone's life. Emily placed a hand on her father's shoulder. "This drawing should be framed. It's special." Mr. Sinclair nodded. "Yes, I want to hang it right here, where I can see it every day." Jake couldn't stop smiling. He had never imagined that a simple sandwich would lead to this, a friendship, a lesson, and a memory that would last forever. As he and his mom left that day, he knew one thing for sure. He would never forget Mr. Sinclair, and Mr. Sinclair would never forget him. A week had passed since Jake had visited Mr. Sinclair. Life had gone back to normal: school, homework, and hanging out with his best friend, Lucas. But something inside Jake felt different. Every time he walked past the sandwich shop, he looked at the spot where Mr. Sinclair had once sat. It reminded him of how one small act of kindness had changed someone's life. It made him wonder how many other people out there needed help. One afternoon, as Jake walked home from school, he noticed a familiar car parked in front of his house. Emily's car. Curious, he ran up the steps and opened the door. His mom was in the living room, talking to Emily and Mr. Sinclair. When they saw him, their faces lit up. "Jake," Mr. Sinclair said happily. He looked even better than before. His clothes were neat, his hair was combed, and his eyes were bright with life. Jake grinned. "Hey, Mr. Sinclair, it's good to see you again." Emily smiled. "We wanted to stop by because my dad has something for you." Jake tilted his head. "For me?" Mr. Sinclair reached down beside his chair and pulled out a neatly wrapped package. "I used to be an artist," he said, "and I haven't painted in a long time. But your drawing inspired me to pick up my brushes again." Jake's heart pounded with excitement as he carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a framed painting. It was a painting of him. In the artwork, Jake was sitting on the sidewalk, handing a sandwich to Mr. Sinclair. The colors were warm, the details perfect. The look of kindness on Jake's face was captured beautifully. Jake's mouth fell open. This is amazing." Mr. Sinclair chuckled. I wanted to paint the moment that changed my life, and I wanted you to have it to remind you of the good you did. Jake stared at the painting, feeling a lump in his throat. This is the best gift ever. His mom wiped her eyes and smiled. It's beautiful. Emily nodded. My dad is back to doing what he loves, all because of you. Jake felt a mix of pride and happiness. He never expected anything in return, but this painting meant more to him than words could explain. Mr. Sinclair patted his shoulder. I want you to remember, Jake. A little kindness goes a long way. You never know how much it can change a person's life. Jake nodded, holding the painting close. I'll never forget that. As he looked at the painting, he realized something. This wasn't just about one sandwich or one act of kindness. It was about seeing people, truly seeing them, and making a difference, no matter how small. And in that moment, Jake knew that this was just the beginning. Jake placed the framed painting on his desk, staring at it with a smile. It was more than just a gift. It was a reminder that one small act of kindness could change everything. Days passed, and life felt a little different now. He started noticing things he never had before. The homeless man who sat near the bus stop, the woman outside the grocery store asking for spare change, the boy at school who always sat alone. Before, Jake might have walked past without thinking. But now he saw them. Now he cared. One afternoon, as he and Lucas sat in the cafeteria, Jake looked at his sandwich, then at the table where a quiet boy named Ryan sat alone. His clothes were worn, and he rarely spoke to anyone. Jake nudged Lucas. Hey, I think I'm gonna sit with Ryan today. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Ryan? Why? Jake shrugged. Why not? Lucas hesitated, then smiled. All right, let's go. The two of them grabbed their trays and walked over. Ryan looked up, surprised. Hey, Jake said. Mind if we sit here? Ryan blinked, then nodded. Sure. As they ate, the conversation started slow, but soon Ryan was laughing at Lucas's jokes and telling them about his favorite video games. Jake realized something important. Kindness wasn't just about giving food. Sometimes it was as simple as making someone feel included. That weekend, Jake and his mom were at the grocery store when they spotted Mr. Sinclair and Emily near the produce section. Jake, Mr. Sinclair called, waving. Jake ran up to him. Hey, Mr. Sinclair. How are you? The old man grinned. Better than ever. I started painting again. Emily even set up a small gallery for my work. Jake's eyes widened. That's awesome. Emily smiled. And guess what? My dad wants to use some of his paintings to raise money for homeless shelters. Mr. Sinclair nodded. I know what it feels like to be out there with nothing. If I can help even one person, it'll be worth it. Jake felt a warmth in his chest. That's amazing. Emily looked at Jake's mom. And we actually have something to ask you both. His mom tilted her head. What is it? Mr. Sinclair smiled. There's a community shelter that serves meals to the homeless. We volunteer there on Sundays. Would you and Jake like to join us? Jake's mom looked at him. What do you think, Jake? Jake didn't even have to think. He grinned. I'd love to. Mr. Sinclair patted his shoulder. You're a good kid, Jake. I knew that from the moment you gave me that sandwich. Jake smiled. It wasn't just about the sandwich. It was about seeing you. The old man's eyes twinkled. And that made all the difference. The next Sunday, Jake and his mom arrived at the shelter. He helped serve food, greet people, and even sat down to talk with some of them. As he handed a sandwich to an elderly woman, she looked up and smiled. Thank you, young man. Jake smiled back. You're welcome. And in that moment, he knew kindness never stops. One small act had started something bigger, something that would keep going, changing lives one person at a time. And Jake was proud to be part of it.